What unfolds when one of Hollywood's most admired performers takes a seat for what is expected to be a standard promotional appearance, only to find himself facing questions that feel more like a cross-examination than a conversation? This is the story of the tense moment when Brad Pitt appeared on The View, and the discussion took a sharp and uncomfortable turn after Sunny Hostin pushed beyond the boundaries of what had been agreed upon. The morning at the studio began routinely. Brad Pitt had committed to appearing on the daytime talk show to promote his newest film, following the advice of his publicist as part of a carefully organized press tour. Known for his professionalism, he arrived ahead of schedule, greeting crew members warmly before heading to hair and makeup. While stylists worked, he reviewed his prepared talking points. He had always believed in approaching interviews with seriousness and respect, whether they were major press conferences or casual daytime segments. During a commercial break before going live, Whoopi Goldberg smiled at him as they settled into their seats. She thanked him for coming, and he responded with his familiar easygoing charm, mentioning that he had always appreciated visiting the show. Joy Behar leaned in and assured him they planned to keep the conversation light, focusing on the film and perhaps sharing a few entertaining behind-the-scenes anecdotes. Brad nodded, adjusting his microphone, clearly comfortable with that plan. Sunny Hostin, seated at the end of the panel, remained quiet as she reviewed her notes with notable concentration. With her background as a legal analyst and former prosecutor, she often approached discussions with precision and intensity. On this particular morning, however, her focus seemed sharper than usual for what was intended to be a straightforward promotional interview. Once the cameras rolled, Whoopi introduced Brad Pitt enthusiastically, highlighting the buzz surrounding his new thriller. Brad slipped effortlessly into interview mode, describing his character as a man forced to confront difficult truths from his past while trying to protect his family. He explained that the script had drawn him in because of its themes of redemption and responsibility. Sarah Haynes commented on the impressive action sequences and asked about the most challenging aspects of filming. Brad reflected that while the physical demands were significant, the emotional scenes required deeper effort. Portraying a character burdened with guilt and striving to make amends demanded intense focus and vulnerability. Until that moment, Sunny had listened without interruption. Then she leaned forward slightly, her tone shifting the atmosphere. She referenced the themes of accountability and asked Brad how public figures should handle past mistakes. The transition was subtle but unmistakable. Brad responded calmly, stating that accountability matters for everyone, not just celebrities. People make mistakes, he said, and growth comes from learning and striving to improve. Sunny acknowledged his answer but pressed further, suggesting that some mistakes warrant more than reflection and growth. Some, she implied, require consequences. A noticeable tension settled over the set. Whoopi glanced toward Sunny with visible concern, hinting that this line of questioning had not been part of the pre-show agreement. She gently suggested steering the conversation back to the film. Sunny, however, insisted the topic was relevant, noting that Brad's character dealt with consequences for past actions and asking how much of that storyline resonated with him personally. Brad's composed smile held, though there was a faint flicker in his expression signaling awareness that the interview had veered off course. He replied that actors inevitably draw from personal experiences to inform their performances, as that is part of the craft. Sunny repeated his phrase, personal experiences, and pointed out that his own history included serious allegations that had not been fully addressed in public. The studio seemed to fall into an uneasy silence. Joy and Sarah exchanged brief looks, and Whoopi's expression hardened. She reminded Sunny that they had discussed boundaries beforehand. Sunny responded that viewers deserved candor rather than polished public relations statements. Maintaining steady composure, Brad acknowledged that Sunny was doing her job but clarified that he had come to discuss his work. If other subjects needed to be explored, he suggested, perhaps they could be addressed in a different forum. Sunny countered that this was the forum available and implied that his attempt to redirect the conversation reflected avoidance. The question lingered heavily. Brad's jaw tightened slightly, though his voice remained even. He stated that he was not avoiding anything but simply trying to uphold reasonable boundaries regarding the purpose of his appearance. Sunny reacted skeptically, remarking that it was ironic to hear about boundaries given certain personal allegations. At that point, Whoopi interjected firmly, signaling that the exchange had gone far enough. Yet Sunny continued, asserting that she was voicing what others might be thinking. She argued that promoting a film centered on accountability, while sidestepping personal accountability, appeared contradictory. The energy in the studio had shifted entirely from lighthearted promotion to palpable discomfort. What had begun as a routine stop on a press tour had transformed into a confrontation that blurred the lines between journalism and ambush. Brad remained seated, composed but clearly frustrated, navigating the delicate balance between defending himself and refusing to escalate the moment further. For viewers, the scene was striking. Daytime television is typically associated with lively but controlled conversations, not tense exchanges that resemble courtroom questioning. The clash of expectations, one side anticipating a promotional chat, the other determined to pursue pointed accountability, created an atmosphere that felt charged and unscripted. As the discussion continued, it became evident that the boundaries between entertainment and interrogation had been crossed. The discomfort was visible not only in Brad's restrained expressions, but also in the reactions of the other hosts, who appeared caught between supporting a colleague and preserving the tone of the program. What was meant to spotlight a new cinematic project instead became a lesson in how quickly live television can pivot from cordial to contentious when preparation and intentions collide. "Can't you recognize the contradiction in that?" Sunny pressed, her words hanging sharply in the air. Off to the side of the stage, Brad's publicist, who had been observing the exchange with growing concern, shifted position and subtly caught his attention. The look between them said everything. The conversation had veered far from its intended course, and it was becoming urgent to find a way out before things escalated further. Brad inhaled slowly before responding. His voice remained measured, though there was now a firmness beneath it that hadn't been present earlier. He explained that while she might hold strong views about certain matters, this particular setting was not appropriate for that kind of debate. He emphasized that he had agreed to appear in good faith to discuss his latest project, not to revisit personal controversies. Sunny's tone sharpened. She insisted that her remarks were not driven by personal opinion, but by legitimate concerns about issues he had sidestepped for years. The temperature on set seemed to rise with every exchange. Joy shifted in her seat and suggested that perhaps they should pause briefly and regroup. Sunny immediately dismissed the idea, saying the discussion should continue. She pivoted directly back to Brad, noting that he had built a career portraying admirable, principled characters. Then she questioned what happened when filming stopped and the cameras were gone. What about the man behind those roles? The implication was unmistakable. Brad's posture changed. His hands, which had rested loosely in his lap, now gripped the edges of his chair. He told her plainly that she was crossing a line. Sunny countered without hesitation, asking whether she truly was out of bounds or simply raising questions other interviewers had avoided because they were too dazzled to challenge him. He responded that the situation felt like an ambush. The agreement had been to discuss his film, not to conduct a cross-examination. Sunny replied that art, personal life, and decisions were intertwined, and that accountability could not be neatly separated into compartments. Brad shook his head slightly, and said he was not attempting to divide anything, but he also refused to remain seated while being attacked under the guise of a professional interview. Slowly he stood up. The movement instantly heightened the tension. Sunny leaned back, appearing almost satisfied by his reaction. She remarked that he was choosing to walk away again. Brad corrected her, saying he was removing himself from what had become a hostile environment, and that there was a distinction between the two. She questioned whether there truly was any difference. From her perspective, she said, it resembled a pattern that had followed him for years. The atmosphere in the studio grew heavy and strained. Brad remained standing, his publicist edging closer to the stage. The other hosts seemed stunned into silence, visibly uncomfortable with how the exchange had unfolded. Sunny, in contrast, appeared energized as though she had anticipated this very confrontation. Whoopi attempted to regain control, urging Brad to sit back down so they could reset the conversation. She tried to calm the situation and steer it back to manageable ground. Sunny, however, was not ready to yield. She declared that this was precisely the moment that needed to happen. She referenced patterns again, suggesting that whenever situations became uncomfortable, he had a tendency to leave rather than address them directly. Brad turned toward her fully, the calm exterior beginning to crack. He asked what she was truly trying to achieve with this line of questioning. Sunny replied that her goal was honesty, her voice taking on a deliberate, almost courtroom cadence. She suggested that transparency seemed to make him uneasy. He repeated the phrase, honest conversation, challenging her interpretation. In his view, the exchange was not honest but orchestrated as a trap. He accused her of leveraging her position to launch a personal attack disguised as journalism. Sunny shot back that she was simply using her platform to pose necessary questions. Questions about power, privilege, and the way certain figures in Hollywood were shielded from scrutiny while others were not. Joy once again attempted to interject, gently warning that the discussion was heading somewhere unproductive. Sunny kept her focus squarely on Brad, stating that the direction it was heading was toward the truth, something she implied had been lacking in his public image. Brad's jaw tightened visibly. He told her she did not know his truth. Sunny countered that she was familiar with court records, testimony, and documented patterns. Drawing on her prosecutorial experience, she suggested she recognized behavior when she saw it. Brad responded more sharply than before, pointing out that this was not a courtroom and she was not prosecuting a case. She was hosting a talk show, or at least that was supposed to be the role. Sonny replied coolly that perhaps the problem was that too many people had handled him delicately for too long. Maybe what he needed, she implied, was someone willing to challenge him directly rather than treat him with deference. Sarah finally spoke up, reminding everyone that this was not the conversation they had agreed upon prior to going live. Sonny turned briefly toward her co-host and stated that what they had agreed on was having a discussion. In her view, she was doing exactly that. If Brad was unable or unwilling to answer straightforward questions about matters already part of the public record, she suggested, perhaps he should reconsider participating in interviews at all. The clash had transformed what was meant to be a promotional appearance into a charged standoff. The contrast between Brad's insistence on boundaries and Sonny's determination to press for accountability underscored a deeper tension about celebrity, media responsibility, and the expectations placed on public figures. What had begun as routine publicity had evolved into a moment that blurred the line between conversation and confrontation, leaving everyone on set acutely aware that the atmosphere had shifted beyond repair. Basic questions. Brad's tone shifted to disbelief. He pointed out that for the past several minutes she had not been asking neutral questions, but making pointed claims and directing personal criticism his way. Sonny immediately reframed his statement, saying she had simply been urging him to accept responsibility. She added that his defensive reaction revealed more than any answer could. Brad responded carefully, emphasizing that his reaction stemmed from what he viewed as a calculated ambush presented under the label of an interview. He asked whether this confrontation had been planned in advance. Sonny replied that her only plan was to fulfill her role, which she defined as asking substantive, meaningful questions rather than offering gentle prompts designed to help him advertise his latest project while ignoring the rest of his public history. Whoopi attempted again to steady the situation, suggesting that Sonny had already made her position clear. Sonny, however, kept her attention fixed on Brad and argued that he had yet to provide a direct response to anything she had raised. Instead, she claimed, he had redirected the discussion, criticized the format, and tried to steer the narrative without addressing the heart of her concerns. Brad's patience was visibly thinning. He countered that the foundation of her questions relied on assumptions and partial information crafted to spark tension for the sake of television. Sonny reacted sharply, challenging his use of the phrase, partial information. She pressed him on whether he was implying that legal proceedings connected to him were based on distortions, or that those who had come forward were dishonest. Choosing his words with care, Brad stated that legal matters are often layered and complicated. He maintained that attempting to portray them in the setting of a daytime talk show was neither appropriate nor professional. Sonny repeated the word, professional, noting pointedly that his own professional conduct had been questioned in the past. At that, Brad declared firmly that he was finished with the exchange. Sonny responded with a tone of grim satisfaction, remarking that he seemed to have a habit of stepping away when situations became uncomfortable, or when he was unable to maintain control. Brad had started toward the exit but paused, turning back to face her directly. He told her she was mischaracterizing both him and the situation. Sonny insisted she was observing a pattern. When confronted with difficult conversations or accountability, he relied on lawyers, representatives, and influence to manage the fallout. She argued that this pattern was evident to anyone paying attention. His voice hardened as he told her she was crossing a serious line. Sonny replied that perhaps she was simply articulating what others had been reluctant to say aloud. She described how he could appear on programs, offer charm and polished answers about his craft, and leave without addressing controversies that continued to shadow him. According to her, those unresolved matters were not irrelevant. Brad answered that what truly mattered was that she was leveraging her position to launch a personal attack in front of a national audience. Sonny shot back that what truly mattered was the broader issue of influential men believing they could shape every conversation and dictate every outcome. She stated plainly that he could not control this one. The discomfort among the other hosts was unmistakable. Joy and Sarah exchanged anxious looks and glanced toward producers off camera for guidance. Whoopi shook her head, visibly frustrated at how the segment had unraveled. She asserted that they needed to conclude the exchange. Sonny, however, insisted they should see it through. Turning again to the film he had come to promote, Sonny referenced the storyline in which his character faces consequences for past behavior. She suggested shifting the focus from fictional accountability to real-world consequences. Brad countered by saying they should instead discuss professional standards and boundaries, implying that those standards had been disregarded. Sonny laughed dryly at the mention of boundaries, questioning whether he was truly in a position to lecture her about them. Brad clarified that he was not lecturing, but reminding her that there was a distinction between a balanced interview and an interrogation. He added that personal viewpoints did not automatically qualify as journalism. Sunny's voice sharpened further as she rejected the idea that her statements were merely opinions. She described them as documented events involving real individuals who had been affected by his decisions. Brad raised his voice to match her intensity, stating that those individuals deserved accuracy and fairness, not selective framing used to advance someone else's narrative. Sunny replied that her only objective was truth and accountability. If that made him uncomfortable, she suggested, perhaps that discomfort warranted reflection. Brad responded that what troubled him was not accountability itself, but the sense that he had been invited under one premise and confronted under another, with the aim of creating dramatic television rather than fostering genuine dialogue. Sunny's eyes flashed as she rejected the notion that this was about drama. She insisted that asking him to acknowledge consequences was not theatrics. Brad then observed that she appeared to be blending her former role as a prosecutor with her current role as a talk show host. He suggested that she had chosen to use him as an example to address issues that extended beyond the two of them. A cold smile crossed Sunny's face as she agreed that the topic was larger than either of them. She spoke about systemic problems within industries that she believed protected powerful figures while marginalizing others. In her view, the conversation transcended one actor or one interview. Brad replied that it seemed she had decided to transform the program into a platform for confronting that system, regardless of whether it was fair to him or suitable for the show's format. The exchange had evolved into something far removed from a promotional appearance, becoming instead a public clash over accountability, media ethics, and the limits of televised discourse. Fair to you? Sunny replied with open disbelief. She challenged his use of the word, asking whether fairness had been extended to the individuals she believed were harmed. She questioned whether it was fair for someone with influence and resources to shape public perception to his advantage. Brad answered in a firm, controlled tone that he would not retry the details of his private life on a daytime program. Sunny immediately countered that perhaps the real issue was that he could not, because once the facts were fully laid out without careful messaging or legal protection, the outcome would not reflect well on him. At the edge of the stage, Brad's publicist stood poised to intervene. The floor manager's anxious expression betrayed how far the segment had drifted from its intended course. The other hosts exchanged uneasy looks, silently signaling their desire for the confrontation to end. The tension in the studio felt thick and immovable. Brad's voice lowered, growing quieter yet more intense. He stated that what had begun as a professional appearance had been twisted into a personal assault. He added that Sunny understood he was limited in this setting, unable to respond in depth or defend himself properly within the constraints of live television. Sunny corrected him sharply, asserting that he was not restricted by format, but by the indefensible nature of his actions. The word lingered heavily in the air. Brad stood motionless, absorbing what she had just declared. The studio fell silent except for the faint hum of cameras and overhead lights. Even crew members seemed frozen in place. After a moment, he repeated the term slowly, emphasizing each syllable. She had labeled his behavior indefensible before a national audience. Sunny responded that she had simply described the situation as she saw it. Brad scanned the room, the other hosts, the crew, the cameras trained on him. Before speaking again, his tone was steady, edged with steel. He said that what he found indefensible was the use of a public platform to damage someone's reputation, based on interpretations of events the speaker had not witnessed firsthand. Sunny insisted she did not need to interpret anything because documented facts already existed. Brad stepped slightly closer to the table, and argued that stating conclusions as if they were proven truths on live television bordered on slander. He accused her of transforming a scheduled interview into an attack on his character without presenting evidence beyond insinuation. For the first time since the exchange began, Sunny appeared less certain. She maintained that she had referenced only matters already part of the public record. Brad responded that implying guilt and presenting personal judgments as established fact went far beyond referencing public information. He said she had positioned herself as judge and jury while shielding herself behind the title of journalist. Whoopi finally rose from her seat, urging both of them to end the confrontation immediately. Brad, however, kept his gaze fixed on Sunny. He suggested that she seemed determined to continue and invited her to do so. If accountability was the topic she wanted to pursue, he said, then it should be examined thoroughly. Sunny straightened in her chair, her courtroom instincts resurfacing. She declared that she was not the one being scrutinized. Brad replied sharply that neither was he, yet she had effectively placed him on trial in front of millions of viewers. He challenged her to outline her case clearly. What evidence had she offered? What facts had she established? And what standard of fairness had she followed? She responded that the show was not a courtroom. Her voice, however, no longer carried the same unwavering confidence. Brad agreed that it was not a courtroom and argued that this setting was even more problematic. In a legal proceeding, he said, there would be structured procedures, opportunities to present evidence, to question testimony, and to defend oneself fully. In this environment, he felt he was being accused without recourse. Sonny attempted to regain momentum by saying he had every opportunity to answer her questions. Brad countered that what she had presented were not genuine inquiries but statements disguised as questions. He said she had framed conclusions first, and then demanded his endorsement of them. Joy tried once more to interject, suggesting that everyone pause and recalibrate. Brad remained focused solely on Sonny, asserting that she had sought this confrontation and orchestrated it. She wanted the exchange to continue, he said, then she should be prepared to see it through. Sonny's jaw tightened as she insisted she would not retreat simply because he was uncomfortable. Brad repeated her phrase, hard questions, and questioned whether that was truly an accurate description of what had taken place. In his view, the interaction reflected a former prosecutor unable to separate a personal mission from the responsibilities of hosting a talk show. Sonny fired back that her responsibility was to demand accountability from powerful individuals. Brad corrected her, saying her role in that moment was to facilitate a balanced discussion, not conduct a prosecution. The clash had evolved beyond a disagreement about content. It had become a fundamental dispute about roles, ethics, and the boundaries of televised discourse. The studio remained suspended in tension. Producers hovered just out of frame, unsure how to regain control without further inflaming the situation. The other hosts appeared caught between professional loyalty and discomfort. What had started as a promotional segment had turned into a public standoff over truth, power, and the limits of media confrontation, with neither side willing to concede ground and the atmosphere charged with the weight of every word spoken. Your responsibility as a host is to conduct interviews fairly, Brad said, his voice controlled but unyielding. It's also to treat the people you invite onto this stage with a basic level of respect. Respect is something that has to be earned, Sonny replied without hesitation. And who appointed you the judge of who has earned it? Brad shot back. Who gave you the authority to decide that I'm not entitled to professional courtesy? The same system that allowed you to believe you could act without consequences. Sonny answered sharply. Brad's eyes flickered with frustration. There it is, he said. This isn't about journalism or accountability. This is about how you feel about a system you think I embody. You do embody it, Sonny insisted. Powerful, privileged, shielded. And you've chosen to use me as the symbol for that, Brad replied, regardless of fairness, regardless of context, regardless of the potential harm you might cause. The harm I might cause. Sonny's voice rose again. What about the harm you've caused? What harm? Brad demanded. Be specific, not vague accusations, not insinuations, not your interpretation of events. What concrete harm have I done that justifies you ambushing me on live television? For the first time, Sonny hesitated. The legal cases speak for themselves, she said. Legal matters that were settled. Brad responded immediately. Private disputes between private individuals. Issues handled through proper legal channels. And now you're using them as ammunition for a televised attack. They were settled because you have the wealth and influence to make them disappear. Sonny accused. They were settled through the legal system. Brad countered, his voice rising. The same system you once worked within, and now you're undermining it by staging your own trial here on a talk show. Whoopi stepped forward, her tone firm. Both of you need to stop this right now. Why? Sonny challenged. Because he's uncomfortable. Because powerful men shouldn't have to answer difficult questions. No, Whoopi replied. Because this isn't journalism. It's become a personal assault, and it ends now. It's accountability, Sonny insisted. It's character assassination, Brad corrected. And I refuse to keep being your target. He turned and began walking toward the exit again. Sonny called after him, her voice cutting through the silence. That's right, walk away. Just like you do whenever you lose control of the narrative. The Brad froze mid-step. When he turned back, the polished composure he had maintained throughout the segment was gone. His expression was raw, direct. You want to talk about control? He said. About narratives. Here's one for you. A former prosecutor turned television host decides to use her platform to pursue a personal crusade. She invites a guest under the pretense of a professional interview. She levels accusations about situations she wasn't present for and cannot fully substantiate. She cloaks it all in the language of journalism while dismantling someone's reputation in real time, and when confronted she claims she's standing for justice. Sonny rose from her chair, facing him squarely. Everything I've said is grounded in documented information. And everything you've said, Brad replied, is filtered through your own interpretation and your own resentment toward what you believe I represent. I don't have resentment. Sonny protested. Don't you? Brad asked quietly. Because from where I'm standing, this feels deeply personal. It feels like you decided I was guilty long before I walked onto this stage, and you're using your position to punish me for it. I'm using my position to ask necessary questions. Sonny repeated. You're using your position to corner someone who can't properly defend himself in this format. Brad said. You know I can't respond here the way I could elsewhere. You could respond honestly, she suggested. I could speak my truth, Brad acknowledged. But you wouldn't accept it. You've already determined what the truth is. Nothing I say would change your conclusion. Try me, Sonny challenged. Brad studied her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. No, I'm not going to give you that satisfaction. I'm not participating in this any further. Because you can't win, Sonny said. Because the situation is designed so I can't. Brad replied. Anything I say can be twisted. Any defense becomes deflection. My only options are to admit guilt on your terms or be labeled evasive. Or you could simply tell the truth, Sonny said again. I could tell my version of events, Brad corrected. But you're not looking for answers. You're looking for a confession that fits your narrative. He stepped toward his publicist, who was waiting near the edge of the set. And I won't provide that? So you're leaving? Sonny called after him. I'm removing myself from a hostile environment, Brad answered without turning around. I'm refusing to take part in my own public dismantling. That's not dismantling, Sonny replied. That's accountability. Brad paused one last time and looked back. No, what happened here today isn't accountability. It isn't journalism. It isn't justice. It's a public condemnation disguised as an interview. And the fact that you can't tell the difference says more than anything I could. With that, he walked off the stage, leaving behind a studio suspended in stunned silence. The cameras continued rolling as Sonny slowly returned to her seat. Her expression carried a complicated blend of resolve and uncertainty. She had secured the confrontation she seemed determined to have, but the exchange had exposed more than she may have anticipated, about her intentions, about the boundaries of media, and about how quickly a conversation can transform into something far more volatile when neither side is willing to yield.